This is Duke University.
Thank you all very much for joining us for a two-day celebration to commemorate, draw inspiration, and I hope also strategize about how to channel the legacy of the late and great Malcolm X on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of his passing. About a year and a half ago, I happened to be teaching a course on the prophetic traditions, Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, and I noticed that we were coming up on the 50th anniversary of some really important milestones, such as the March on Washington, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham, and looking ahead, I was thinking of the February 21st, 1965 assassination of Brother Malcolm. So, since I'm good at math, added 50 to 1965 and got February 2015. So before anybody else, we started talking about what would it be like to have a conversation in which we bring together some of the really extraordinary folks locally as well as nationally who are going to help us think of Brother Malcolm as a Muslim figure, a Black figure, an American figure, and an international figure. And I'm so grateful that we have the extraordinary lineup of colleagues who are joining us today and tomorrow. My very dear colleagues, Juliana Hammer and Mark Anthony Neal, who will be joining us very shortly, have done an extraordinary job of pulling this set of presentations together, along with the remarkable help from Kerry Majikis, as well as Shai Tamari over at UNC. We hope that this kind of a conversation across the Duke and UNC campus can be a model of how we can fight each other tooth and nail, go to hell, Carolina, go to hell,
Excuse me.
on 1 minute, and then collaborate together intellectually at another moment. It's easy to boast and brag when you win. If you lose, then you have to be a gracious loser and say both teams played hard.
Says the guy who just moved from UNC to Duke not so long ago.
It's true. It's true. So I want to set the tone for our conversation the best way that I can think of, which is to actually play 2 minutes of a clip from Brother Malcolm. One of the extraordinary gifts that we have from the legacy of the Black prophetic tradition is that it's one thing to read the words of these folks. It's entirely something else to hear them in their own voice. And it's the same experience I know many of us have had listening to Dr. King, listening to many of the other great exemplars of the civil rights movement. And the particular piece that I've just chosen is one, it's an interview with Malcolm right after he has come back from the Hajj to Mecca. And the reason I've chosen this particular piece is I think in the next couple of days, you're going to hear a lot of these extraordinary speakers whose research is actually even more squarely focused on thinking and rethinking the legacy of Malcolm. They're going to try to situate Malcolm in a whole set of contexts. Local contexts here in the South, American Black internationalist liberationist movements, global Islam, hip-hop, probably leaving out a few other things, but just as a sample of what's going to come. And as we try to think about all of these different contexts, as we try to think about what does this all have to do with our own context, and none of us can, of course, be having this conversation without being mindful of the extraordinary, heart-shattering experiences for many, including in this room, just about a week ago in this very community. Not to say anything about other tragedies nationwide in Ferguson, Trayvon, and it's a long, long list. Part of our task is also how to not be stupid, how to not think stupid and talk stupid. How do we undo some of the problematic categories and narratives that have been imposed on Malcolm, just as they have been on Dr. King, including a very common one in which we say that, well, you know, Malcolm used to be this hardcore black nationalist, and then he went to Mecca and he saw white Muslims and black Muslims and brown Muslims and white Muslims and purple Muslims all worshiping together, and he became post-racial. And he came back as a kind of universalist champion of brotherhood. So I thought, rather than just critiquing it, why don't we give an opportunity to Brother Malcolm to speak in his own voice? And we're going to hear him for just 2 minutes.
Malcolm X.
I think a lot of people are confused by the new Arabic name, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz.
I've always had the name on my passport, Malik El-Shabazz, only I only used it in the Muslim world. Well, Hajj is a title that is given to any Muslim who makes the pilgrimage to Mecca during the official Hajj season.
Well, will you now use Shabazz and drop X?
I'll probably continue to use Malcolm X and I'll probably use it as long as the situation that produced it exists.
You don't feel that Shabazz takes the place of X?
My going to Mecca and going into the Muslim world, into the African world, and being recognized and accepted as a Muslim and as a brother may solve the problem for me personally. But I personally feel that my personal problem is never solved as long as the problem is not solved for all of our people in this country. So I remain Malcolm X as long as there is a need to protest and struggle and fight against the injustices that our people are involved in this country.
Are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please.
I think you're right in my camera.
The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society. Even in
We mean serious business here, people. So I think I'm going to turn it over to my much wiser and more eloquent colleague, Professor Hammer, and just ask us over the course of the next couple of days to keep in mind these 3 areas that emerge from this short clip that you saw. On one hand, what does it mean when Malcolm uses the phrases of Muslim world and African world interchangeably? What does it mean if Islam is somehow intrinsically seen as a global liberationist, anti-oppression, anti-exploitation discourse? Number one. Number two, how do we take seriously this notion that Malcolm says that he's concerned not only about his own situation, but that the focus is on structures and institutions? And then third and lastly, I hope that you also saw him flash that extraordinary smile, that ability to move from sarcasm to gentleness to complete seriousness, and what that has to say about the ability to somehow combine together the fierceness of critique with the gentleness of spirit. Let me turn it over to my dear friend, Professor Juliana Hammer.
I'm going to take about 30 seconds because I think we need to get started. And Omid has already brought in many of the thoughts and ideas that we had in preparing this conference. I'm very grateful to everyone who's made it here. The weather is bizarre by North Carolina standards, and you're all here, and our speakers are all here. What I want to add is something that's concerned me for some time and was the main reason why I, who is a scholar of American Islam, but certainly not a scholar of, who specifically has done research on Malcolm X, what brought me to this conference is a lot of thinking that I've done recently in other contexts about the academy. And conferences are usually very organized affairs, right? Like you're all sitting in rows, there are people here, they know how long they're supposed to talk for. And this particular conference, at least I would hope, is supposed, at least that's my expectation, is supposed to transcend that format, in the sense that I think the academy can, and I think should be, a space for radical transformation, for the possibility of thinking not just about producing more and maybe different knowledge about Malcolm X and unearth more facts about his life and reinterpret or assess the various interpretations of his life, but to actually do something with that. And Omid has already pointed out the particular historical moment that we're living in many different ways. It's a difficult moment. I'm sometimes, when I wake up and look at the news, not convinced that it's not just all falling apart somehow. And so I'm hoping for myself and for many of you who are here that we'll do more than talk about Malcolm X, in the sense that for me, he has always been an inspiration in the ways in which he was willing to question and challenge, and to be willing to overthrow what wasn't working. And as an academic who has been domesticated in the way that we often are, I mean, in my field, we're often told that we shouldn't be activists at all because it makes us less objective, and we taint our research. And pushing back against that, and pushing back against the distinction or the division between scholarship and activism, and between our roles as, in the case of many here, scholars and educators, and our roles in society, in society doing something. This is the main reason why I invested effort as I have, even though Omid is, as always, way too humble and did a lot more of this than I did. So I'm hoping that this is gonna be transformative in ways that transcend in many different directions what an academic conference usually accomplishes.